The ART of the hand. Palmistry, chiromancy, and the language written in your palm. History, origins, and the complete system of hand reading, lines, mounts, finger length, hand shape, texture, and fingerprints. A global tradition, or India, China, Persia, Greece, Rome, medieval Europe, the Americas. Personal reading series or Haligricity or IQ Productions or June 2026. Part Intro. The hand as sacred text. Why every tradition that looked closely at the human being eventually looked at the hand. The hand is the most expressive structure the human body produces. It builds, heals, gestures, creates, destroys, and comforts. It is also, across virtually every major civilization that developed a system of esoteric knowledge, understood to be a map. Not a metaphor of a map, an actual record, written in skin and bone and line, of who a person is, what forces shape their entry into this life, and what potentials and challenges their particular incarnation carries. The art of reading this map goes by several names. Palmistry is the most common English term, derived from the Latin palma, meaning palm. Chiromancy comes from the Greek chair and manteia, literally, hand divination. Chirognomy is the specific study of the hand's physical structure, its shape, size, finger proportions, skin texture, and overall form. Chirosophy is the broader philosophical framework within which hand reading sits in many traditions, the understanding that the hand reflects the whole person, body, mind, and soul. In Chinese tradition, it is Shushang, hand physiognomy. In Sanskrit, Hasta Samudrika Shastra, the ocean of knowledge written in the hand. Haligricity approaches palmistry not as a party trick or fortune-telling performance, but as one of the most ancient available systems for self-knowledge, a technology for reading the specific energetic signature that an individual carries into this life, and understanding how that signature interacts with the people and circumstances they encounter. So does not determine the future. It describes the nature. Personal reading series, or Haligricity, or IQ Productions, or June 2026. Part 1. Where palmistry came from, a global origin story that crosses every major civilization, India. The oldest continuous tradition, the oldest documented system of palm reading on Earth, is found in India, specifically within the Vedic tradition's broader science of bodily signs, Samudrika Shastra. This system, referenced in texts dating to at least 2000 BCE, and possibly much older in oral form, treats the entire human body as a sacred text. The shape of the nose, the quality of the skin, the structure of the feet, the proportion of the limbs, all are understood as expressions of the soul's condition and the life's trajectory. The hand receives the most sustained attention because it is the most legible portion of this text, the most differentiated, the most individually variable, the most accessible to detailed reading. The Indian specific lines, mounts, finger qualities, and fingernail characteristics, and synthesizes all of these into a comprehensive reading of the person's constitution, likely experiences, and spiritual development. The Indian system is also the most formally integrated with astrology. The mounts of the palm correspond directly to the 7 classical planets, and a hand reading in the Indian tradition is simultaneously an astrological reading conducted through the body's own record rather than through a birth chart. India also produced Has Jyotish, literally hand astrology, which is practiced in an unbroken lineage to this day across much of the Indian subcontinent, particularly in Rajasthan, where the Brahmin families who specialize in this science have maintained their lineage knowledge for generations. China, the integration with 5-element theory Chinese hand reading developed in parallel with India's, emerging from the broader Chinese physiognomic tradition that is at least as old as the Shang dynasty. The Chinese system integrates hand reading with 5-element theory, the foundational organizing principle of Chinese medicine, cosmology, and philosophy that maps all phenomena onto the relationships between wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. In the Chinese system, the hand structure reveals the dominant element of the person's constitution. A wood hand belongs to a person of strong will, growth-oriented energy, and potential rigidity. A fire hand belongs to a person of intense creativity, charisma, and emotional volatility. An earth hand belongs to a person of stability, practicality, and physical endurance. The lines are read in the context of this elemental constitution rather than in isolation. A long heart line means something different in a fire hand than it does in an earth hand. Chinese hand reading also developed an especially sophisticated system of reading the fingers separately. Each finger corresponds to a specific organ system and elemental force, and the relative length, flexibility, and condition of the fingers gives information about the health and vitality of the corresponding organ system. This integrating with Chinese medical diagnosis created one of the most practically useful hand-reading systems in the world. Persia and the Arab world, the bridge between East and West Persian scholars of the Islamic Golden Age, received the Indian and Greek palm reading traditions through translation and synthesis, and transmitted them westward into medieval Europe. The great physician Avicenna, whose canon of medicine became the foundational medical text of medieval Europe, discussed the hand's lines as diagnostic indicators, connecting specific line configurations to specific constitutional tendencies and health vulnerabilities. The Arab tradition integrated palmistry with the broader system of physiognomy that had deep roots in both the Persian and ancient Greece and Rome, Aristotle, Alexander, and the philosophical hand. The Greek encounter with Indian palmistry likely occurred through Alexander the Great's campaigns in northern India, which brought Greek scholars into sustained contact with Indian sacred science for the first time. Whether through this route or through earlier trade connections, palmistry was well established in Greek philosophical and medical circles by the classical period. Aristotle is credited in multiple medieval sources with a treatise on chiromancy, and while the specific attribution is disputed, the Greek philosophical framework for palmistry is characteristically Aristotelian. The idea that the soul expresses itself through the body, that the body's structures are meaningful rather than random, and that reading those structures is therefore a legitimate path to self-knowledge. In the Roman tradition, Julius Caesar was said to be a skilled palmist who used hand reading in his assessment of potential allies and adversaries. Medieval Europe, the Church, the Gypsies, and the underground tradition, the Christian Church's official position on palmistry was hostile. It was classified as divination and therefore heretical, associated with pagan tradition and demonic influence. Official suppression drove the tradition underground without eliminating it. Monastic libraries preserved Greek and Arabic texts on physiognomy and palmistry. Folk traditions maintained practical palm reading across the European peasant world. And most significantly, the Romani people, who migrated from northern India into Europe beginning around the 10th century CE, brought with them the unbroken Indian palm reading tradition and became the primary public practitioners of the art in European society for centuries. The association between Romani culture and palm reading is not a stereotype without historical basis. It reflects a genuine cultural transmission. The Romani carried the Indian Hasta Samudrika Shastra across Persia, through the Byzantine world, and into medieval and Renaissance Europe. Their palm reading practice was the Indian tradition adapted to new cultural contexts, maintained in a living oral lineage, and offered to a European public that was simultaneously fascinated by it and legally prohibited from practicing it themselves. The Renaissance revival, chiromancy as respectable science, the Renaissance rehabilitation of Greek and Roman learning extended to palmistry. Between the 15th and 17th centuries, a series of serious academic chiromancy texts appeared in European universities. Works by Johann Hartlieb, Andreas Corvus, and most significantly, Johann Karl Caspar Lavater, whose late 18th century work on physiognomy brought systematic hand analysis back into respectable intellectual company. Palmists sought to integrate the tradition with the period's developing interest in astrology, alchemy, and hermeticism, creating what became the dominant Western esoteric palmistry that informed all subsequent European and American palmistry writing. 19th and 20th century. The modern tradition, the figure most responsible for shaping modern Western palmistry, is Count Louis Hamon, who wrote under the name Cheiro. His books, Cheiro's Language of the Hand and subsequent works, systematized the tradition for a mass audience and read the hands of some of the most famous figures of his era, including Mark Twain, Oscar Wilde, King Edward VII, and Thomas Edison. Cheiro's system, which synthesized Indian, Greek, and European palmistry into a coherent practical framework, became the foundation for virtually all 20th century Western palmistry writing. In the 20th century, palmistry also received attention from psychology, most notably through the work of Charlotte Wolff, a German Jewish physician who fled Nazi Germany and conducted systematic scientific studies of hand morphology in the 1930s and 1940s. Wolff's research demonstrated measurable correlations between hand structure and psychological constitution, not in the fortune-telling sense but in the constitutional sense, that specific hand configurations appear with statistically significant frequency in people with specific psychological profiles and medical conditions. Opened a scientific conversation that continues in modified form in contemporary medical palmistry and dermatoglyphics research. Part 2 hand shapes the foundation of any reading, what the overall form reveals before any line is read, before any mount is assessed. The overall shape and proportion of the hand gives the most fundamental information available about a person's constitution. This is the layer of the reading that is hardest to fake and hardest to change. It reflects deep structural qualities that were established before birth and remain essentially stable across the life. The hand-shaped classification systems differ between traditions, but the following are the most widely used in contemporary practice. From my research, what stood out in my research was that hand shape is the first thing a skilled reader assesses. It sets the context for everything else. The same line means something different depending on the shape of the hand it lives in. The earth hand, square palm, short fingers, the palm is approximately square, and the fingers are shorter than the length of the palm. This is the hand of the person who is grounded, practical, reliable, and deeply connected to the physical world. Earth hands belong to people who build things, maintain things, and persist through difficulty with a steadiness that more volatile hand types lack. The shadow side of the earth hand is resistance to change, difficulty with abstraction, and a tendency to get stuck in practical concern at the expense of vision. The earth hand person may be the most reliable partner in the room, and the hardest to move. The air hand, square palm, long fingers, the palm is roughly square, but the fingers are noticeably longer than the palm length. Air hands belong to people of active intellect, communicators, analysts, connectors, people who process the world through thought and language. They tend toward curiosity, sociability, and a certain restlessness. The mind needs stimulation and novelty to remain engaged. The air hand person is often the most interesting conversationalist in the room, and sometimes the least grounded. Their challenge is bringing their abundant mental energy into consistent physical action. The fire hand, rectangular palm, short fingers, the palm is noticeably longer than it is wide, and the fingers are shorter than the palm length. This is the hand of intense creative energy, charisma, and emotional expressiveness. Fire hand people lead through their presence. Their enthusiasm is contagious, their confidence is compelling, and their capacity for passionate engagement with whatever interests them is extraordinary. The fire hand person burns brightly and can burn out quickly. Their challenge is sustaining what they begin and managing the intensity of their own emotional experience. The water hand, rectangular palm, long fingers, both the palm and the fingers are long, with the fingers equaling or exceeding the palm length. Water hands belong to people of deep sensitivity, strong intuition, and rich emotional life. They absorb the emotional atmosphere of any environment they enter. They feel what others feel before those others have named their own feelings. This sensitivity is a profound gift and a genuine challenge. The water hand person can be overwhelmed by the emotional density of the world if they do not develop strong boundaries and emotional self-care practices. Wintuition, when trusted and developed, is among the most reliable available. Additional classifications, many traditions add further classifications beyond the four-element system. The philosophic or psychic hand appears in older European systems as the hand of the visionary or mystic. The mixed hand, showing characteristics of multiple types, is actually the most common in practice and reflects the actual complexity of most human beings, who rarely fit neatly into any single elemental archetype. Part 3: the fingers. Length, proportion, and what each finger represents. The fingers are one of the most information-rich parts of the hand, not just individually but in relation to each other. The relative length of the fingers, the proportion of each phalange, the flexibility of the joints, and the shape of the fingertips all contribute to the reading. Each finger corresponds to a specific domain of life and a specific planetary energy in the Western tradition, and to specific organ systems in the Chinese tradition. From my research, finger length stood out as one of the most immediately useful elements of the reading system, observable, measurable, and genuinely informative about how a person approaches the specific domains each finger represents. The index finger, Jupiter, ambition and leadership, traditionally called the Jupiter finger in the Western system, associated with ambition, leadership, authority, and the ego's relationship with power. A long index finger indicates strong leadership drive, ambition, and confidence, sometimes tipping into dominance or control. A short index finger suggests self-doubt, reluctance to take charge, or a preference for supporting roles rather than leading. The relative length of the index versus ring finger is also significant in contemporary research. Studies in prenatal testosterone exposure have found measurable correlations between the index to ring finger ratio and specific personality and health characteristics. The middle finger, Saturn, responsibility and structure, the Saturn finger. The longest finger on most hands, and the one whose relative length matters as a reference point for all others. The middle finger speaks to the person's relationship with responsibility, discipline, structure, and seriousness. A very long middle finger indicates a strong Saturn quality, conscientiousness, tendency towards seriousness or melancholy, high standards, sometimes rigidity. A middle finger that is not significantly longer than its neighbors suggests a lighter relationship with responsibility, more spontaneity, less structure, sometimes less follow-through. The ring finger, Apollo, creativity and relationship, the Apollo finger. In most Western palmistry systems, the ring finger speaks to creativity, aesthetic sensibility, risk appetite, and the capacity for joy. A long ring finger indicates strong creative drive, aesthetic gifts, love of beauty, and sometimes a gambling or risk-taking quality. The Apollo energy in full expression enjoys the spectacle of high stakes. A short ring finger suggests more caution, less comfort with creative risk, and sometimes a subdued relationship with pleasure and beauty. The ring finger's length relative to the index finger is one of the most studied proportional relationships in contemporary research. The little finger, Mercury, communication and commerce, the Mercury finger. Associated with communication, intelligence, sexuality, and the capacity for subtle influence. Finger indicates strong communicative gifts, verbal facility, commercial instinct, and often significant sexual charisma. A short Mercury finger suggests difficulty with self-expression, challenges in communication, or a tendency to underestimate one's own intelligence or impact. Mercury finger analysis is particularly useful in assessing a person's natural medium, whether they communicate best through words, touch, image, or silence. The thumb, will and logic, the thumb stands apart from the finger system and is given particular weight in many traditions. It is divided into two phalanges. The top phalange represents will, the capacity to act on one's intentions, and the lower phalange represents logic, the capacity to reason. Part 4, the lines of the palm direction, quality, length, and what each line reads. The lines are what most people think of first when they think of palmistry, the visible grooves that cross the palm in patterns that are simultaneously universal and completely individual. The lines are read for their length, depth, clarity, direction, color, and the specific markings that appear along their course. From my research, what stood out in my research was that the quality and direction of the lines matters as much as their length. A deep, clear, unbroken line reads very differently than a faint, chained, or interrupted one, even if they cover the same territory. Line quality. Reading before the specific lines are assessed individually, the overall quality of the lines on a hand tells you something essential about the person's overall constitutional energy. Deep, clearly etched lines indicate strong vitality, clear emotional expression, and decisive character. Fine, delicate lines indicate sensitivity, a nervous constitution, and subtlety of experience. Chain lines indicate constitutional weakness in that line's area, physical, emotional, or mental, depending on which line. Broken lines indicate interruptions, changes of direction, or significant events in the area that line governs. Forked lines at their ends indicate the energy splitting, often indicating two possible directions or a divided orientation in that area of life. The lifeline, vitality, not longevity, the most misunderstood line in popular palmistry. The lifeline does not predict how long a person will live. What it reveals is the quality and vitality of the life force, the person's constitutional energy, their resilience, their capacity for physical and emotional recovery, and the significant changes in their life's direction and quality. It begins between the thumb and index finger and arcs downward around the base of the thumb toward the wrist. A wide arc indicates strong vitality and a life of broad experience. A narrow arc indicates more restricted energy or a more internally focused life. A long, deep, unbroken lifeline indicates strong constitutional vitality. A short lifeline does not mean short life. It often means a person who lives intensely but changes direction significantly at some point. Islands on the lifeline indicate periods of lowered vitality. Breaks indicate significant life changes rather than endings. The headline, the mind in its orientation. The headline crosses the palm horizontally from its beginning near the lifeline's origin. It reveals how the person thinks. Not how intelligent they are, but how their intelligence operates. A straight headline indicates logical, analytical, pragmatic thinking. A headline that curves downward toward the wrist indicates imagination, intuition, and a creative or poetic mind that processes reality through image and feeling more than through linear logic. The steeper the downward curve, the more pronounced this quality. The length of the headline indicates the breadth of the person's mental interests. A long headline crossing the full width of the palm belongs to a person with wide curiosity and multiple intellectual domains. The depth and clarity indicate concentration. A deep, clear headline belongs to someone who can focus intensely. A faint or chained headline can indicate scattered attention or mental inconsistency. Where the headline and lifeline begin in relation to each other is also significant. A joined beginning indicates caution in family, indicates independence and confidence from an early age. The heart line, emotional life and relational style. The heart line runs horizontally across the upper portion of the palm, below the fingers. It reveals the emotional character, how a person loves, how they express affection, what they need in relationship, and how they process emotional experience. It is one of the most complex lines to read because emotional life is one of the most complex dimensions of human experience. A heart line that ends under the index finger indicates an idealistic, romantically oriented emotional style. This person loves deeply and holds high standards for their relationships. A heart line ending under the middle finger indicates a more self-focused emotional style, love expressed through practical care rather than romantic gesture. A heart line ending between the two fingers is considered the balanced position, a blend of idealism and practicality in emotional life. The curve of the heart line is particularly significant. A strongly curved line indicates expressive, demonstrative emotional style. This person shows what they feel. A straight heart line indicates a more mental, less demonstrative emotional orientation. Feelings run deep, but expression is controlled. Chains on the heart line suggest emotional complexity or inconsistency in the relational life. Islands indicate specific periods of emotional difficulty or confusion. The fate line, life path and direction. Not everyone has a fate line. Its absence is itself significant. When present, it runs vertically up the palm from the wrist area toward the middle finger. The fate line speaks to the degree of structure and direction in a person's life, how strongly they feel the sense of a path, a calling, or a life's work that organizes their choices and energies. A strong, clear fate line from the wrist upward indicates a person with a strong sense of purpose and a life organized around consistent direction. A fate line that begins partway up the palm indicates that this sense of direction developed later in life. A fate line that begins from the lifeline indicates a self-made path, direction chosen through personal effort. A fate line beginning from the luna mount indicates a path shaped significantly by public life, other people, or creative intuitive work. Breaks in the fate line indicate significant changes of direction. Secondary lines, the sun, Mercury, and intuition. Lines, the sun line runs parallel to the fate line toward the ring finger. When present, it indicates a life brightened by creative success, recognition, or personal happiness. The Mercury line descends from the little finger toward the wrist and relates to health, communication, and business acumen. The intuition line appears in highly intuitive individuals and indicates strong psychic or empathic sensitivity. The girdle of Venus relates to emotional sensitivity and sensory responsiveness. Part 5, the mounts of the palm, the 7 planetary territories, and what they govern. The mounts are the raised, fleshy areas of the palm, each one named for a planet and governing the domain of life and character that planet traditionally rules. A well-developed mount indicates strong energy in that domain. A flat or absent mount indicates less emphasis. An overdeveloped mount indicates excess in that area. The mounts work together as a map of the person's energetic landscape. From my research, the different areas of the palm and what they represent was one of the most immediately usable parts of my research. Understanding which area governs which domain gives you a reading framework you can apply right away, even before you learn the lines in depth. Mount of Jupiter location, base of the index finger, ambition, leadership, spirituality, and the ego's higher aspirations. A well-developed Jupiter mount indicates a person of strong vision, leadership quality, and genuine spiritual hunger. Overdevelopment indicates pride, domination, or grandiosity. Mount of Saturn location, base of the middle finger, wisdom, responsibility, solitude, and depth. A developed Saturn mount indicates a person of serious character, philosophical depth, and strong conscience. Overdevelopment can indicate melancholy, excessive caution, or a tendency toward isolation. A flat Saturn mount is associated with a lighter, more social character. Mount of Apollo location, base of the ring finger, creativity, beauty, success, and joy. A well-developed Apollo mount indicates artistic gifts, a love of beauty, and the capacity for genuine happiness. It is associated with recognition, public success, and creative abundance. Overdevelopment can indicate vanity or an excessive need for attention. Mount of Mercury location, base of the little finger communication, commerce, science, and wit. A developed Mercury mount indicates sharp intelligence, communicative gifts, business acumen, and psychological insight. Overdevelopment can indicate a tendency toward manipulation or deception. Mount of Venus location, the raised area at the base of the thumb, inside the lifeline love, physical vitality, sensuality, beauty, and the life force itself. The Venus mount is the largest and most significant mount on the palm. A full, firm Venus mount indicates strong physical vitality, warmth, generosity, and a rich capacity for love and physical pleasure. A flat Venus mount indicates lower vitality, emotional coolness, or difficulty with physical intimacy. Mount of Luna. Location, the outer lower palm, opposite the thumb. Imagination, intuition, the unconscious, travel, and the watery depths of the psyche. A developed Luna mount indicates strong imagination, psychic sensitivity, love of travel, and a rich dream life. Many poets, musicians, and psychic sensitives carry prominent Luna mounts. Overdevelopment can indicate excessive fantasy, moodiness, or difficulty distinguishing inner from outer reality. Mount of Mars. Location, Mars has two locations, Upper Mars and Lower Mars. Lower Mars governs courage, aggression, and the willingness to initiate. Upper Mars governs moral courage, endurance, and the capacity to hold ground under pressure. The plane of Mars represents the balance between these two expressions of the Mars energy. Part 6, fingerprints. The permanent patterns, what dermatoglyphics reveals. Fingerprints are among the most permanent features of the human body. They are formed in the womb between the 10th and 24th weeks of fetal development and do not change significantly across the lifetime. Unlike the lines of the palm, which can shift with life experience and personal development, the fingerprint patterns are fixed at birth. In palmistry, this means they speak to the deepest, most foundational level of the person's nature, the qualities they brought into this life, rather than what life has shaped them into. From my research, the different types of fingerprints stood out in my research as one of the most underappreciated elements of handreading. Most people think of fingerprints only as a forensic identification tool, not as a meaningful part of character. Each pattern type carries real and distinct information. The formal academic study of fingerprint patterns is called dermatoglyphics, and it has produced a significant body of research connecting specific fingerprint patterns with specific constitutional, psychological, and medical characteristics. The following are the primary pattern types. The loop. The most common pattern loops are the most common fingerprint pattern, found on approximately 60 to 65% of all fingertips. The ridges enter from one side of the finger, curve, and exit from the same side. Loops indicate adaptability, sociability, and openness to experience. People with predominantly loop fingerprints tend to be flexible, responsive to their environment, and skilled at working with others. They adapt readily to new situations and may take on the emotional coloring of their surroundings more readily than other pattern types. Loops can be ulnar or radial. The whorl, the individualist pattern whorls form circular or spiral patterns and appear on approximately 30 to 35% of fingertips. A person with predominantly whorl fingerprints carries a strong individual identity. They process the world through their own internal framework rather than through adaptation to their environment. Whorls indicate depth, focus, strong personal opinions, and a tendency towards specialization. People with many whorls are often highly capable in specific areas and may have difficulty with the generalist demands of conventional social life. Whorls on specific fingers have specific meanings. A whorl on the thumb indicates strong personal will. A whorl on the index finger indicates strong independent leadership drive. A whorl on the ring finger is associated with exceptional creative or artistic gifts. A whorl on the little finger indicates a highly individual communication style. The arch, the practical pattern arches are the least common primary pattern, appearing on approximately 5% of fingertips. The ridges enter from one side and exit from the other in a simple arch without the loop's curve or the whorl spiral. Arches are associated with practicality, reliability, caution, and a grounded materialist orientation. People with predominant arch patterns tend to be doers, focused on the practical, the tangible, and the demonstrable. They may struggle with abstraction or emotional complexity and tend to express care through practical action rather than verbal or emotional expression. The tented arch, a rare variant where the arch rises to a sharp peak in the center, modifies the basic arch quality significantly, adding intensity, enthusiasm, and sometimes. Part 7, hand texture, the most intimate reading. What the skin itself reveals. Hand texture is one of the most underemphasized elements in popular palmistry and one of the most immediately meaningful in skilled practice. The texture of the skin, assessed by looking and by touch, reveals the fineness or coarseness of the person's nervous system, their sensory sensitivity, and their overall constitutional register. It is also one of the most important elements in understanding compatibility and connection between people. From my research, this was one of the most striking insights from my research, that hand texture matters deeply even in serious relationships. If your hand texture differs significantly from your partner's, it will be genuinely difficult to connect on a deep level, because you are operating at fundamentally different registers of sensory and emotional sensitivity. This is not a superficial compatibility issue. It goes to the core of how two people experience reality. Fine texture, the sensitive register, fine textured skin, smooth, silky, with a delicate appearance and a refined feel, indicates a nervous system tuned to subtle frequencies. The fine textured person feels everything at a higher resolution than their coarser textured counterparts. They register nuance, mood, atmosphere, and emotional undercurrent with extraordinary sensitivity. They are often artistically gifted, emotionally perceptive, and easily overwhelmed by environments that are too loud, too crowded, or too energetically chaotic. Their aesthetic sensibilities are refined, and their standards for beauty, for taste, for the quality of their experiences are high. The challenge for the fine-textured person is the world's coarseness. They can be easily hurt, easily overwhelmed, and sometimes perceived as overly sensitive by people whose nervous systems register at a coarser frequency. In relationship, they need a partner who either shares their sensitivity or who actively honors and protects it, rather than dismissing or overriding it. Coarse texture. The robust register, coarse-textured skin, visibly thicker, rougher, with more pronounced pores and a more weathered quality, indicates a robust, durable nervous system. The coarse-textured person is built for endurance. They handle physical challenge, emotional adversity, and environmental harshness with a steadiness and resilience that finer-textured people may genuinely lack. They tend toward directness, practicality, and a no-nonsense relationship with reality. Their sensory threshold is higher. They need stronger stimulation to register what the fine-textured person feels at the subtlest level. The challenge for the coarse-textured person in relationship with a fine-textured partner is genuine. What feels like normal, comfortable interaction to them may feel overwhelming, rough, or insensitive to someone whose nervous system is calibrated to a finer register. This is not a character failure on either side. It is a constitutional difference that creates real friction if it is not understood and consciously navigated. Texture compatibility in relationship. When two people have significantly different hand textures, they are essentially living in different versions of the same sensory world. The fine-textured person may feel the coarse-textured partner is emotionally unavailable, unsubtle, or incapable of the depth of connection they crave. The coarse-textured person may feel the fine-textured partner is hypersensitive, demanding, or exhausting. Both perceptions are real, and both are the expression of two constitutionally different nervous systems trying to find each other across a sensory gap. Knowing this does not resolve the difference, but it transforms it from a personal failure into a constitutional reality that can be worked with consciously. Personal Reading Series, or Haligricity, or IQ Productions, or June 2026. Part 8. The Hologric Lens. What Palmistry offers. The Hologric practitioner Palmistry earns its place in the Haligricity library, not because it predicts the future, but because it offers one of the most accessible and most richly developed available systems for self-knowledge through the body's own language. The Hologric tradition holds that self-knowledge is the foundational sacred work, that you cannot do the deeper work of conscious creation, sacred relationship, and spiritual development without an honest understanding of who you actually are, what you actually carry, and what your specific nature requires. The hand as a tetralty map. Each major line of the palm corresponds to one of the tetralty's 4 dimensions. The heart line speaks to feeling, the emotional dimension of conscious experience. The head line speaks to thinking, the cognitive dimension. The lifeline speaks to doing, the physical, vitality-based dimension of engagement with the world. The fate line speaks to the integration of all 3 into speaking, the life's expressed direction, the path that becomes visible when feeling, thinking, and doing come into alignment. A complete hand reading is, in this sense, a complete tetralty assessment, reading where a person's strength and challenge lie in each of the 4 dimensions of conscious creation. The hand as constitutional self-knowledge. One of Haligricity's core teachings is that self-care must be constitutional, calibrated to who you actually are rather than applied generically from someone else's system. The hand reading tradition offers one of the most nuanced available constitutional assessment tools. It tells you your elemental type, your dominant energies, your characteristic ways of thinking, feeling, and engaging with others, your deepest fixed nature, and your sensory register. A holistic practitioner who knows their hand knows what self-care practices will genuinely serve their nature, and which ones are simply imported from someone else's constitution. The hand and sacred relationship, the texture insight. That constitutional sensory register creates real compatibility dynamics in relationship, is deeply aligned with the holistic understanding that relationship is a sacred technology. The Tetralty Journals Feel section is where the practitioner tracks the emotional dimension of their life. Understanding their own and their partner's constitutional emotional register gives that journaling practice a precision it cannot have without this information. Knowing that you are a fine-textured water hand in relationship with a coarse-textured earth hand is not a reason to separate, it is a map of the specific sacred work that this particular pairing requires. Reading your own hand, a starting practice begin with the non-dominant hand, which most traditions associate with the inherited constitution, what you came in with. Then read the dominant hand, which reflects what your life and choices have developed. The difference between the two hands is itself the story of your development, where you have grown into your potential and where the original constitution remains unchanged. Assess in order, shape first, then texture, then fingers, then mounts, then the major lines. Build the picture gradually rather than jumping to a single dramatic line. The hand, like any sacred text, gives its deepest meaning to those who read it slowly. The hand you are carrying right now contains more information about your nature than most people receive about themselves in a lifetime of casual self-reflection. The tradition that learned to read it developed over thousands of years across India, China, Persia, Greece, Personalin, Reed Gevry series sculpture Haligricity, Tuki Q, Productions The Humaner June being seriously enough to look closely. What it found, consistently, is that the hand does not lie. It holds the nature plainly, available to anyone who learns the language. Grand Rising. Personal Rending Series, Huinery or LQ. Productions Heim 2020.